Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. It feels like I've been away for weeks, it feels as if I've been away for a month. I left here in what felt like summer, and now I'm back and it's that time of year when the kids are asking, how many Prime Ministers is it to Christmas, Daddy? Tonight, after another tumultuous week in politics, we'll be discussing how Britain will see its third Prime Minister in 4 months, and it might be the first one we got rid of. Boris Johnson, of course, has rushed back from his Caribbean beach and reports say he's up for it. Have we well and truly lost the plot? Also on the show, I'll be joined by the ex-Sky and ITV News boss Mark Sharman to discuss a documentary which explores the alleged link between COVID vaccines and injuries. And because boy do we need something to laugh about right now, we'll be flicking through the Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards. Animals captured doing hilarious things. What more could you ask for on a Saturday evening? All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Polly Middlehurst.
Neil, thank you. Good evening to you. The top stories on GB News, as you were just hearing, Boris Johnson has reportedly reached 100 backers in the race to become Britain's next Conservative Party leader. Sources close to the former Prime Minister have told GB News today Mr Johnson, who's yet to declare, has now passed the threshold required to get onto the leadership ballot. That comes after Rishi Sunak also got the backing of 100 Conservative MPs. And yesterday, Penny Mordaunt became the first to officially announce her campaign to replace Liz Truss. Boris Johnson's father, Stanley Johnson, told GB News earlier his son has unfinished business and will enter the race.
I think he will put his name forward, and I think he will beat Rishi Sunak in a head-to-head. And I want to say, because I'm now going to reveal this for the first time, when I get my vote, my electronic password, I will be voting for Boris, because I think he will do the things I care about: Europe, environment, peace in our time, and net zero.
But Boris Johnson is yet to face scrutiny from the Commons Privileges Committee on Partygate. In an exclusive interview with GB News, former Speaker of the House of Commons John Bercow said he thinks due process and fairness is incredibly important.
Pulled no brief for Boris Johnson, whom I thought was an absolutely appalling Prime Minister. But I think the question of the procedural propriety of that process is absolutely critical. It should be front and centre stage. And I would say that whether it was Boris Johnson being investigated or anybody else.
Meanwhile, the former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab told GB News he thinks Rishi Sunak is the best person for the job.
I think he is, both on economic but also on those critical issues of public trust, the best place to get the government and fundamentally the country moving forward. The trust that the public have in the leader matters, and that's why I think Rishi is best placed to deliver in the national interest.
Well, in news away from politics, a planned bus strike by hundreds of workers has been stopped following a new pay offer. Around 600 members of the Unite union at Arriva in Kent were set to walk out for 5 days from Monday. If the new pay deal is rejected, the strike's action, scheduled for Friday the 28th of October, will go ahead. And 68 courts across England and Wales will be affected by striking staff today. Legal advisors and court associates who are members of the Public and Commercial Services Union are going to walk out for 9 days. The workers are locked in a dispute over a management system which their employer says is key to modernising the court process. Plus, Avanti West Coast managers are also striking today in the 4th day of walkouts for the train company this month. The RMT union saying the timetable and operating hours will be significantly reduced, with just 1 train an hour running from London to Manchester, Glasgow and Liverpool. Further industrial action planned across other rail companies at the start of next month. And just lastly, international news, Iran has condemned a UN probe into allegations its country's drones are being used for Russia to attack Ukraine. France, Germany and Britain called for the United Nations to investigate the Kremlin's alleged use of Iranian-made drones. It follows claims from US intelligence that Iranian military trainers were in Crimea helping Russian forces operate drones to attack targets in Ukraine. Oh, one more story. A yellow weather warning is in place for most of England and parts of Wales for this weekend. Brace yourselves for thunder, heavy rain and flooding. The thunderstorm will last between 4 a.m. tomorrow until 5 a.m. Monday, so pretty much all weekend from now on. Forecasters warning the wet weather could lead to flooding and possible road closures. We'll keep you updated. You're updated for now on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Neil Oliver Live.
Boxing legend Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Some or other military mind of ages past, Wellington, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Sun Tzu, take your pick, said no plan survives contact with the enemy, which is saying the same thing about sudden blows to tender parts. For those alarmed by talk of punches, let me stress that I refer in what follows only to blows metaphorical and not literal. Hard-earned wisdom like that from Tyson and the rest is always worth remembering, but those words are especially relevant now. The game's afoot, as Sherlock Holmes said. No one is in overall control, not yet, no matter what anyone says or thinks, and there's everything to play for, and I do mean everything. If you have felt increasingly angry about what is happening, then that's fine. Given the contempt with which our leaders and their would-be successors are treating us, we should be furious. But now, when so much seems lost in darkness, is the time to remember things are happening fast and faster because no one has their foot on the brake. Now is the time to hold on and remember that fortune favours the brave. The corrupt establishment received their punch in the mouth and saw their plan fall apart on contact back in 2016. Contrary to the smug expectations of David Cameron and his masters, Brexit won the referendum, and the Machiavellians had to pick up their ideological teeth with broken fingers. It's been chaos ever since, chaos agitated endlessly and remorselessly by those in need of a smokescreen for their latest movements as they try and maintain control. Theresa May got in the way of Brexit as best she could. Johnson rode a wave that was there for the riding, which is essentially what he does in life in general, but was tripped up by a birthday cake and flushed away, at least for a while. And then came Truss, poor thing. And now, well, it doesn't matter really, in the same way that none of them matters. In the same way that a sock is just an empty pocket of wool and goes where it goes only on account of the foot that's wearing it. The original plan, the only plan for one world government and total control, is still out there, splattered with blood, snot and spit after that straight right punch of Brexit. And also the election of Donald Trump, let's not forget, sent them reeling. In many ways, I think they're still reeling. They're clever, those globalists, but that kind of clever, stupid clever, that always leaves their kind open to what congenital oddness cannot comprehend, far less foresee or deal with, which is to say regular people prepared to stand up and say, we see you, and also, no way. Straightforward, honest tactics work well in the face of those reliant on writing computer code while tucked up in bed in their Star Wars gym jams, or colluding with their similarly privileged chums to get oh so cunningly worded legislation slipped through a parliament stuffed with more of their terminally awkward sort. They're clever and also rich, or with access to the rich, and therefore equipped with the funds and or the contacts necessary to buy and control the media, the legislature, the judiciary, academia, the civil service, and the rest of the institutions that all smell now of week old fish. But fear not, fear nothing but fear itself, because the foes, emboldened by the events of the last 2 years, revealed themselves. Many of us see them now, and having seen them, we must never lose sight of them again. We've seen them and their dodgy medical products pushed and sold with downright barefaced lies, their cheerleading for never-ending war, their climate fear-mongering. Now we see them clearly, and the fight for freedom is straightforward. It's straightforward because anyone pushing an anti-human, soulless, greedy, heedless agenda is spitting in our faces, as well as in the face of the natural order of life and of the universe itself. In Canada, poor Canada, Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland recently mouthed off about rising fuel prices being good. Good because they would remind Canadians every time they filled up their fuel tanks at the pumps about the need to end fossil fuels forever and so save the planet. How utterly economically illiterate, or indeed shamelessly and knowingly psychopathic, can a senior politician be? Stupid question, of course, for there are no such limits for such people. How can anyone be allowed to achieve high office without knowing that unaffordable energy has consequences that reach all the way down until they result in the hardship, starvation and death of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of the poorest people in the poorest countries in the world? And yet she, Friedland, and others of her ignorant ilk in positions of power all across the West are ceaselessly opening their mouths to spout more of the same unforgivable, ultimately murderous nonsense about Agenda 30 and net zero. Anyone standing up to them, ready to deliver another metaphorical punch to the mouth to their abomination of an agenda, is by definition in the right and on the right side of history. Never forget this, because the right is as irrepressible as the grass and as perennial. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the grass always grows and right always prevails. Remember and know too that those enemies of freedom, those proponents of one world government, of digital currencies programmed to put us on a leash like dogs, of social credit scores and genderless, neutered populations, have a tiger by the tail, if not many tigers, and they know it. They're in the fight of their lives. We all are. And so what do they pull? Here in Britain, once Great Britain, but now enduring carefully choreographed ritual humiliation in front of the rest of the world, the enemy seeks to distract us with a Westminster-based pantomime of Z-rate actors devoid of talent of any sort. Silly Hunt and hapless Shaps are on stage already, talentlessly mumbling lines written for them by others, while Rishi Washi waits in the wings in another strangely tight and tiny suit and memorising whatever script he was handed yesterday. What grade of morons do they imagine they're dealing with if they think this drivel, this transparent mugging for the cameras, is going to distract us long enough for them to build the digital cage around us? Anyone who's seen a panto, even a good one, knows that actors may change, but the script remains the same year after year. And all the while we're plied with bad political actors and their familiar backdrops, coaxed and cajoled into watching by compliant mainstream media. Real people all over the world are rising in their millions. It's one of the great and unforgivable disgraces of this moment in the 21st century that our media pushes round-the-clock coverage of the rise and fall of this week's Cinderella. Out there, mostly ignored, good people are valiantly fighting for their lives and for the right to life itself. The puppet masters of the latest worn-out Punch and Judies think they can distract us with amateur dramatics, while all around us real flesh and blood human beings, our fellow travellers, are breathing and sweating and bleeding red blood in defiance of totalitarians and authoritarians across Europe, in Canada and in the US, in Iran and everywhere. Iran, benighted by tyranny as it has been for half a lifetime, is home to some of the bravest of the brave. For those with eyes open, it has in recent weeks been revealed as a place that's home yet to warriors and heroes, women and men, some little more than children, willing to stand up again and again in the face of their tormentors and say no more. And while they lay their lives on the line, the mass of the craven legacy media here and elsewhere offers cursory coverage of the most shallow and lukewarm sort. How awkward it must be for them to acknowledge the rising of a population in the face of murderous totalitarian oppression, when those in charge of matters in the West are driven hardest by their need to throttle and silence the very notion of popular protest and defiance. In the Netherlands, so far from Iran and so different in so many ways, it's nonetheless the same story. That scrap of a place, scraped out of the seabed in ages past by defiant men and women and transformed into an erstwhile Eden that has been the world's second biggest producer of food, is being laid low, gutted like a fish by a government captured by the dull-eyed ideologues of the WEF, a lying nonsense about saving the world by cutting nitrogen emissions, which insists upon the culling of half the national herd and driving as many as possible of the farmers off their land to make way for a megacity of 45 million souls, is unfolding just across the North Sea, and yet that same captured relic media, that sham media, completely ignores the atrocity playing out under its watch. All across Europe and the wider world, it's the same. All manner of decent, hard-working people, the products of one ancient, unique, noble heritage after another, who live and die for family, for safe national borders and distinct national identities, from west to east, are being disregarded by those in the service of an anti-human agenda, shaped only to further enrich the bloated elites that have already benefited from the greatest transfer of wealth in all of history. Here in Britain, the Tarquins and Tamaras of Richmond and Fulham are almost fetishised by that same complicit media as they spill milk on the floors of delis in the upmarket London postcodes where they live out their pampered 4x4 driven trust fund financed lives. Their toddler antics are reported round the clock by cash-whipped media in a blatant bid to so enrage those still watching the Beeb and Channel 4 and the rest of the knee-bending mainstream, so that on cue and in line with the script, those unwitting will positively cheer when yet more bills are passed through Parliament to make public protest illegal, while moving to censor and so control the internet and social media. It obviously makes sense to make sure the streets and squares are made devoid of inconvenient protest too. Step forward the stooges of yet another cunning plan, milk bottle and glue bottles in hand. But here's the thing, fear not, do not lose heart, not ever, but certainly not now. If it feels like chaos, it's because it is chaos, a chaos curated and purveyed by those technocrats and the rest of the misanthropic odd squad, while they seek to recover from that proper crack landed smack on the jaw by Brexit and a non-compliant population desiring peace from meddling control freaks and the freedom to get on with their lives. And when all else fails, never forget the wisdom of Lance Corporal Jones in Dad's Army, that sitcom from a world more decent. When contemplating how best to deal with the baddies, remember, they don't like it up 'em. All of that is my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can tweet me as well, @gbnews, and I'll try to get to your comments later in the show. Joining me on the panel this evening is Conservative member of the London Assembly, Keith Prince, and Narinder Kaur, broadcaster, and according to your Twitter feed, Narinder, self-proclaimed failed reality TV star. You're very hard on yourself.
I think I'm doing a little bit better than what's going on in Westminster at the moment, which is a bit of a Big Brother show.
Yeah. Are you, Narinder, are you engaged at all by what's going on in Westminster?
Yeah, I'm like, it is like a Big Brother show. It's like, who goes, you decide. But it just seems mad what is going on. They didn't like Boris, we got rid of him. Oh, you know what, we don't want Rishi, we'll get Liz in. Hang on a minute, we don't like Liz. Let's get rid of her and let's get Rishi in now, the one we should have got in the first place. But hang on a minute, what about Boris again? The person we got rid of 6 weeks ago. Make it make sense, Keith. Make it make sense to me.
Can you still retain a sense of this being serious behaviour by grown-ups?
Well, I've retained a sense of humour, if that's what you mean. I've been involved in politics most of my life, and coming up to 45 years now, I've never seen anything like it. It's a one-off.
Are they? And when I say they, I mean the contents of that chamber. I mean Labour as well. Are they making of themselves an irretrievable irrelevance? For one thing, they're so close together ideologically. You know, they just try to outdo one another in the extremes of whatever is the bid of the moment. Are they actually backing themselves into the shadows, where they will disappear, and the necessity to replace them with something else?
Well, I mean, that's the amazing thing. I mean, if I was Labour right now, I'd be telling people what a wonderful job I would be doing running the country. Instead of that, they're like school children saying, oh, look at the Tories, they're all a mess and they're all
they're not as bad as the Tories, though, Keith. Come on.
But Labour has a leader that can't tell you what a woman is.
Yeah, but let's not go into that.
How can you run a country?
Well, because, you know, he's
if you can't identify half your electorate.
What's wrong with being inclusive? They're being inclusive.
That's not being inclusive.
I think that's being inclusive.
That is obfuscating and dodging the question in a culture in which to say anything is the losing move, because they don't have the backbone, any of them, to just stand up and say what they know to be true and damn the consequences.
Well, no, I disagree with that, because when they had that whole Rupert Hook thing with the whole superficially black, you know, they stood up. Keir Starmer did. He you know, immediately got rid of Rupert, and they do stand up. They do have a backbone. And I think in terms of the woman, I think that's just they're trying to be inclusive.
They're not showing it. They're not showing that they are a serious political party. And I think it's mad. If I was Keir Starmer, I'd obviously be laughing my head off at this moment in time, but I'd also be showing that I had all the policies and all the team to run the country.
But I say to you, though, people out there in the real world are frightened by what lies ahead. You know, we've got a story coming up where, you know, the head of the National Grid is promising, more or less, that there'll be power outages, blackouts on the coldest days of the winter. People can't afford food. They can't afford their energy bills. And what are they being offered? They're being offered this farce of a pantomime, week after week after week, performed by the very people who are supposed to be making their lives, if not better, which is really what they ought to be about, at least making their lives survivable.
They don't care. They don't care, Keith. I'm sorry. They don't
Keith,
care.
Come on.
Well, look, I think Liz did try to do something. Obviously, she did try to do something about the energy crisis, and I think what she did was right. But, of course, she bundled in there a whole load of other stuff, which was really quite bizarre, to be perfectly blunt and honest. And the whole message was lost. But, you know, this is not just down to the Conservative Party, although I think we should accept some of the blame. I mean, there's a world crisis going on. This is not unique to Britain. It's not unique to Europe or the world. You know, we have the Russians invading Ukraine. Ukraine actually, surprisingly, supply a lot of the products that we use, and that also affects the energy. So it's not all of our making, but I really do think we need to get a grip, and we need to get a leader who is actually going to take control and sort this mess out.
I mean, for one thing, it's the lack of culpability and the lack of willingness to stand up and take responsibility for mistakes in the past. Whatever Russia and Ukraine are up to in their part of the world, it's years, more than a decade of ridiculous policy decisions around energy that have exposed us. I mean, if it's raining, you can't complain if you get wet. You know, it's about wearing a coat. It's about being prepared for the circumstances in which you might find yourself. And the fact that there's whatever situation going on with gas is because the largest storage installation for gas in Britain was shut down and not replaced.
Yeah. No, I can't argue with you. And there's a whole succession, not just the Conservatives, but the whole succession of governments have not been brave enough to take those decisions that were needed to be taken to make us self-sufficient in energy. And I don't think even now we're doing enough. And we need to really get a grip. And because people are saying, well, you know, nothing will happen for 12 years or whatever, so what? Let's get a grip of it now. Let's make those decisions now.
Since when did the Tory party lose its backbone? When did the Tory party is supposed to be strong. They're supposed to know they're not scared. And it's almost like we've got a Labour Party in charge. when they're making their decisions. There's no decision making. They seem scared all the time.
I don't think anybody...
Liz Truss made a U-turn.
We're going to have to go to a break at the moment, although we can pick up all of this in the hours and minutes ahead. After the break, we'll be getting the latest on the ongoing Tory turmoil with the former Downing Street Press Secretary for John Major. See you in 2 minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth famously took delivery of 15 Prime Ministers during her 70-year reign. The way things are going for the Conservative Party of late, her son Charles III might break that record by Christmas. It's an early pantomime for the long-suffering electorate, I say. And now the usual suspects are lining up in the wings for another encore. Once more with feeling, everyone. Joining me now to blow on the fading embers of anyone's enthusiasm is Jonathan Haslam, former Chief Communications Director for Her late Majesty's 9th Prime Minister, John Major. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining me, Jonathan.
Good evening, Neil, and to your guests as well.
Thank you. My wolfhound pup isn't 2 yet, but this will be her 3rd Tory Prime Minister. Surely this is farcical now, no?
It's a very, very sad state of affairs for a proud country, and we're led at the moment by a Conservative Party that has a very big nominal majority in the House of Parliament. It's got 80 people, and I think it's several Conservative parties, really. There is a party of the faithful out there, the 170-odd thousand people who voted in the recent election, which gave us Liz Truss. Then there is a Conservative Party, which I think is two parties. There is a centrist One Nation party, and there's more to the right, and that's where some of the problems lie. And they don't have very long, really, to get themselves sorted out. And I think where we are at the moment, Neil, is that the chances are they will lose the next election. They will put it off for as long as they can do. But they have to provide a degree of stability for the country until that point, and for themselves. And tonight we've just heard that Boris Johnson has got the number of votes that he might need to get on a slate. We're assuming that Rishi Sunak, who's not yet declared, has, but Penny Mordaunt has not. So I think we'll find out an awful lot more from the Sunday papers, because I'm sure that Rishi Sunak is talking to them extensively. And there are some very serious decisions to be taken. And I think I've listened to you very carefully, and I'm looking for solutions. I think we know what the problems are, and you set them out. We're looking for solutions, and I think we really do need to have a period of stability now to allow markets to settle and for policies to be focused on those who are going to suffer most. I'm sure that would strike a chord with you and your guests in the studio.
Jonathan, the polls, or at least one poll, is predicting that if there were to be a general election anytime soon, you'd be looking at 500 Labour seats, which is an Armageddon. Is this hypothetically the end of the Conservative Party? Is it an existential crisis?
It can be. There's no doubt that they're going to suffer, but the Conservative Party does have a reputation for coming back. If you look to the first time, if you go back in history, there was a thing called the Tamworth Manifesto, which was probably about the first time you had a Conservative manifesto, and that was 1834 under Robert Peel. And 2 years after that, they had the Tory party tearing itself apart over the Corn Laws. And if you go into the early part of the 20th century, there were similar ructions which took them a long time to recover from. But I think there are a few things, hurdles that we need to overcome first. We do need to get in a new Prime Minister. And I think what's deeply worrying to me is any suggestion that this would be an opportunity for Boris Johnson yet again to get out of jail free. There is quite a lot of chatter within the corridors of the House of Commons that were he to win an election, if he gets on the slate with Rishi Sunak and the two go forward, the chances are that the party at large would actually vote for him again. So a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, look at that, but then you spend the next 2 months with the Standards and Privileges Committee examining whether or not he misled the Houses of Parliament intentionally. And the rumour in the House of Commons is actually that the governing party would try to put a 3-line whip to suspend the Standards and Privileges Committee investigation, and therefore with one bound Boris Johnson might be free. That would be a challenge. I think it would be a constitutional outrage, personally. So there's an awful lot of politics to go on. And what we do need to do, and Keith's point of view here would be interesting, is for the Conservative Party to stop talking about itself and to get on and start talking about the country and really focus on its job. And if we talk about Labour, Labour's got one game to play here, which is to let the Tories tear themselves apart. So they can show that they're doing enough. Keir Starmer made yet another speech this week. So he's keeping his head above the parapet. But that's politics for you. We do really need to get some resolution and grown-ups in the room very quickly.
I hear you asking there for Keith's perspective on this. Well, Keith, how do you respond to that about the Conservative Party not just talking about itself and talking about someone else, for goodness sake?
Agree 100%. I mean, there's so many things that need to be sorted. You know, we've got the issues around food, we've got the issues around energy, we've got the world instability. So, yeah, that's what we need to get a leader in who's going to deal with that, and we do not need any more wrangling. And one thing we do normally, actually, is we do get behind our leaders. And we've got a great reputation for that. That's why we are the natural party of government.
Jonathan, on that point, leaders, how can it be that a cast of characters who were also recently discarded one way or another, Boris by the party, Jeremy Hunt most definitely not wanted, the other losers in the battle, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, why is there nothing better for the country, for the Conservative Party, but to do a kind of a 2 a.m. bin rake in the disco and find somebody out of those that have already been discarded?
I think you're a little bit hard on people. Politics is a rough game, so if you find yourself on the wrong end of a particular faction and we're going against the tide, you can have problems. Now, Jeremy Hunt is not a stupid man. He's very intelligent, far from it. He's run his business. He's got some example in business in the real world. He didn't make too many friends when he was in the health department, but he took things on and had to see them develop. And since then, he has seen his reputation rebound as he's been the chairman of the Health Select Committee. And there are other talented people within the Conservative Party. One of the big problems that Liz Truss had was to get a lot of yes people around her, because that's where her comfort zone is. There's an awful lot of talk, Neil, about somebody who can unify the party. Well, good luck with that, because it's two parties in many respects. What you hope to be able to do is to find a leader of integrity with a moral base, and you can see who I'm ruling out, and intelligence and the wherewithal to be able to help the country steer its way through a really difficult position. And I'm not going to deny, of course, absolutely not. Keith's right. A lot of the problems are international. We've inherited them. But my word, we have created an awful lot ourselves. And the Conservative Party does bear a significant degree of blame for that. So there are talented people out there. The task of somebody coming in, I think Sunak's the right man for the job, would be to have Penny Mordaunt as his deputy and to promote talent. When Boris Johnson left, 50 really sensible people said, we're not working for you for very good reasons. They should be reinstated. I'll give you one example. There's John Glenn at the Treasury, who's a very, very sensible fellow dealing with an incredibly difficult brief around financial regulation, and he'd spent time in the post. And that's talent lost, and there is more talent to be had.
I'll have to leave you with that.
It's a real problem, but
I have to leave you there with that one example. I have to leave you there with that one example, Jonathan, purely because we've run out of time. And Jonathan Haslam, former communications director for John Major, thank you very much for your time this evening. I have to go to the break though. After which I'll be joined by the ex-Sky and ITV News boss Mark Sharman, who has been exploring the alleged link between COVID vaccines and injuries in a new documentary production. Don't go away.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. While not treated to anything like as much coverage as spoiled brats throwing milk and soup around in the name of saving the world, brave opponents of Iran's theocracy are facing down their oppressors' bullets and demanding change. What might have seemed unthinkable, impossible only a matter of weeks ago, which is to say regime change in Iran driven by a popular uprising featuring in large part women and girls making bonfires of their head coverings, is looking increasingly possible. My next guest tonight is Maya Towsey, YouTuber and political commentator who has been following events there in forensic detail. Maya joins me now. Maya, what is the latest state of play in Iran?
So we are now on day 37, I believe, 36, 37 of the people's uprising. It's still going on. The regime are out of control. The reason this matters, and the reason it's very significant, even for the West, is because this is actually the first people's uprising that is so far going against the norm since the French Revolution, technically speaking.
In which way do you mean against the norm?
The norm from whether it's the way the globalism is going and the way certain things that are politically incorrect. So they are fighting against the Islamic regime. So that's one thing, and they are leading a movement for a more free society, and it's not backed by any globalist entity up to a point where, in fact, they are ignoring them. You know, the mainstream media, the Western systems that, used to interfere a lot in that region, they are suddenly quiet and silent. And they've been forced to get your Joe Bidens and, your Liz Trusses until yesterday to send press releases saying, oh, yes, we will condemn lack of human rights. Then what?
So they're pushing back against the, whatever you want to call it, the woke, the globalist consensus of the world.
Yeah, this uprising, and when the BBC every few months talks about it, for 10 minutes they call protests. They're not protests, it's an uprising, and it is actually continuing to fight for liberty and self-determination and secularism and democracy. They finally unified the movement, the Iranians. This is actually creating a very libertarian movement. They've written a manifesto, different groups, and a pre-written constitution, basically. It's essentially, the slogans and the chants are woman, life, liberty, man, nationhood, prosperity.
Mayor, do they have an actual leader? Do they have a leader that is...
Yeah.
They do?
No, but yes and no, in a sense that before, until now, all these uprisings failed their attempts because there were so many different factions.
Yes.
And they weren't really different, it was just egos. Sort of like what we have with the political system here. And on the one hand, there are no militant factions, so you don't have the fear of a potential Libya or Iraq.
Right.
But it was all egos, and now they don't really have one leader, but it's working for them.
Well, is that because is there a fear of being a leader for this group? Because will they succeed?
No, so there is a leadership in terms of entity. There is a National Council of Iran in exile, led by the Crown Prince in exile.
So there's a government in waiting?
Essentially, or transitional government. And their aim is to, and they got the consensus of people, they want to have a referendum, get rid of the Islamists, have a referendum, and potentially on a ballot paper, we're going to have a couple of options: constitutional monarchy or a secular a republic of Iran.
Oh, sorry, Keith, you want to come in there?
Yeah, but so that's all well and good, but what about the Basiji, who are the Revolutionary Guards, effectively, aren't they? They're like the youth movement of the Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah, they hit the youth,
well, I wouldn't say that, but, they have a very effective way of suppressing all this sort of thing. And how are they getting around that? Because they will track them down and find them.
We were waiting for that. They were supposed to be crushing that 4 weeks ago.
And there has been blood?
Yes, absolutely. There has been definitely bloodshed, but in a very kind of less focused, in a more kind of out of control way. It's just panicky. We've had evidence. I've got evidence, videos of the police, security forces, armed forces, and a few Revolutionary Guards defecting, putting their membership card, burning them on camera. So they are losing their people up to a point where the regime have gone to get militants from Iraq and Lebanon to come to Iran and beat up their own people. And that is disgusting.
But Mayor, what you were telling me in the green room, I'm horrified. They're raping women. So that they don't make it to heaven.
Yeah, so one of the policies they have, unfortunately, is if they arrest a young woman who is a virgin, and if they're about to kill her, they have to rape them before they kill them, because otherwise they will go to heaven. And that is like the most disgusting thing.
Oh wow! I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
It's all quite mind-blowing in a sense. One thing you just said, that one potential shape of the future, as envisaged by the uprising, a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, that means they're going back in time, all the way back to where Iran was in the 1970s with the Shah.
Or just before that, because that period between the 50s and 79, it became less constitutional monarchy because since the coup. So it became slightly more absolute monarchy, but it was supposed to change back to constitutional monarchy, but the Shah didn't have time. But it's whether it's going to be a Republic of Iran or a constitutional monarchy, the same system for them. They want to basically have the head of state non-political. They want to have the head of state to just essentially be symbolic, and the parliamentary democracy is what they are seeking.
I think most people looking at Iran from here imagine it's a majority Shia Muslim country. What are the demographics and the political and religious factions or splits within the country?
The official data that was even confirmed by our beloved United Nations is that less than 40% of Iranians are Muslim. And there is a small chunk that declared, Christian, with a tiny percentage Jewish and, atheist. But there's a big chunk that just didn't answer. And the theory behind it is that the big chunk is basically Christians and Jews who are scared to even declare for these the surveys and everything else.
What does it mean? I mean, I'm asking you to use the crystal ball. If this regime was to fall, and if something like a secular constitutional monarchy or a republic was to be established in its place, what might be the repercussions in the region and in the wider world of that happening in Iran, of all places?
And this is, I think, one of the reasons that I see, your Biden administrations and the Western governments are kind of cautious or scared. On the one hand, they're afraid of all the previous interventions that made a mess in that region. On the other hand, I could see from their perspective, they'll be so confused because the reason we are close to Saudis is because enemy of an enemy of is a friend. If Iran becomes free and Iran comes to the West and says, not like, let's be best friends, but more like a Switzerland, let's just be allies, and then you can have Iran and Israel go hand in hand, and then what are you going to do with the Saudis? They're going to be angry. And we've got all these contracts and everything else, and we're going to shake their hands. So the Americans need to then change their policy, unless they manage to get the Saudis and Iranians sit down and be like, can we all just be friends?
And
I don't see that happening.
Yeah, that won't happen.
Exactly.
And then the Iranian regime is with Hamas
and
Hezbollah. What happens then in terms of Israel is obviously very very watchful to use a softer word around those groups. If the regime's support of those organisations was to be no more, what would happen there?
It will defund Hamas and Hezbollah, and it will make Jeremy Corbyn even more unemployed. He can't go on the Iran press TV to talk nonsense about, let's just basically say that it's a one-sided fight. All Israelis and the Israeli government are the bad people. There's no nuance in this debate right now. And both sides sometimes get aggressive. After you've seen the Israeli government going aggressive as well, it's because there's no nuance. So Iranians are stirring the pot, as usual, like in Yemen as well. You get rid of that, it makes it easier.
Narendra, you had a question you wanted to ask. I cut in on you there.
No, it's fine. So you feel that this will succeed?
Yes,
women will get their freedom?
Absolutely, yeah.
But Iranian women had their freedom years ago, and then it's gone backwards. I'm astounded by that.
It is a fascinating history. What happened in '79 was the actual uprising was led by the commies that were connected to the Soviet, and they were very violent. And towards the end of that uprising, just before the Shah left Iran, it was stolen by the Ayatollahs, and then the Khomeini came and said, look at me, I'm the old man, I'm going to give you basically socialism, free oil, free bus passes, but I'm the old religious man. Would you trust me? All these infidel, atheist commies. And people fell for it. And
people fell for it. Oh my God, people always fall for it. I just find that has ruined women's lives.
Most of the time, we open the door to tyranny and we don't even realise it. And we have to be careful in the West. And the CIA turned a blind eye and then they indirectly backed it because they didn't want the Soviet to control this new regime. But the Islamic regime got the power. Day one, death to America, and waited until the Soviet fell, and then now they're best friends with Russia.
What do you make? How do you interpret I described it as lukewarm and cursory coverage of what's going on in much of the West. I mean, it is appearing, online and in newspapers, but there's no depth. And it's, as you say, it's just being described as just any other protest.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you interpret that?
I mean, people like me, my channel, and actually thanks to you guys, people like yourself, we kept pushing and pushing over the last 37 days. We are starting to see some coverage, but it's some coverage. On the one hand, I've talked to some people who are in production with your BBCs and Skies. They are confused, they're scared, because the way they will cover it, it would sound like the Iranians are Islamophobic, and Iranians are kind of outspoken. They're saying, if you're in Iran and you see what's happening, it's not Islamophobia, it's Islamotrauma. We're not against Muslims. We're just against this tyranny that's happening.
It always comes back down to Islamophobia, which, are you sure it's up? Because in India, we had the Sikh protest, the farmers' protest. That didn't really make media either. And that had nothing to do with... No, but it had nothing to do with Islam. We're Indian, though, so I don't think it is that.
But it's tiny percent at least that. It's more than that, you're right. It's, beyond
Keith,
that, it's just...
Keith, can I just let you come in there before we finish? Because I think you had something that you wanted to add.
Yeah. So we've talked about the Russians, we've talked about the Americans. So who is actually funding this recent uprising? Who is funding it, and who is looking to gain the most from it?
If you listen to the Iranian regime, they would say Britain and America, and some people are falling for it. This, for the first time, of all these obviously theories and plots that's happening, this one. Well, you can never tell. There will always be one or two in every establishment that would be involved. But in terms of wider support, there is absolutely no interest right now from Britain or America or others. Well, the one group that could actually be interfering in the name of supporting the people is actually Israel. They might be stirring the pot a little bit, but there's no foreign force in an obvious way, because the Iranians who are doing this, they are very sensitive people. They do not want to be backed by any kind of foreign forces. The moment they find out, they will push back, and they've done in the past.
I'm going to have to jump in there. Meir Towsey, YouTuber and commentator. It's an amazing story, which surely has a long way to go yet, and I hope you'll come back and bring us up to date with it as it goes. So fascinating. Now, seldom does there come a topic more divisive than the so-called war on COVID. Opinions about the rights and wrongs of the handling of events by government health professionals and the media are passionately held. What is undeniable, however, is that it's the official line pushed by government and their favoured scientists and medics that has dominated the airwaves. Frustrated by the one-sided narrative, former ITV News executive Mark Sharman has brought forward a new film. Called Safe and Effective, A Second Opinion, with the aim of airing the plight of those hurt or killed by the controversial products rolled out from Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca and the rest. This clip by Georgia Rose-Siegel struggles to walk after her vaccine. For our radio listeners, she enters a kitchen and almost collapses, her legs spasm. Georgia claims her condition, a type of functional neurological disorder, had a direct link to her COVID jab. And Mark Sharman joins us now. Good evening, Mark. Tell me about the background to the making of this film. What prompted you, after all of this time and all of your experience in the industry, to set out on your own with this?
It was the experience in the industry that made me realise there was something wrong, because it became obvious quite early that we weren't being told the whole story. And it goes back really to the numbers, so many deaths within 28 days of a positive test from any reason, and became COVID death. So there was something wrong, and that led me really to meeting some of the vaccine injured, and also working with the company called Oracle Films, a very talented young filmmakers. And we set out to give the vaccine injured a voice, which I hope is what we've done.
Now, you've been in the media industry for a long time now.
Yeah.
What was it about the way the narrative was being portrayed that left you with no alternative but to strike out independently of all of that?
Well, narrative, to me, you could say propaganda. It was just constant government propaganda. And to go with it was this pincer movement between mainstream media and social media, where any opposing view was being cut off, cancelled. People are smeared, or really professional people around the world, scientists, doctors, with hard evidence are being smeared and cancelled and just cut off because it doesn't suit the narrative.
What was the range of side effects and impacts that you encountered when you met the people who were reporting harm and hurt?
Well, it starts with death. There are a lot of people have died. Quite a few of them have been through inquests that have the vaccine as the cause. Mm-hmm. In the film, there's Alex Mitchell, who lost a leg through blood clots, and he's not alone in that. But it's hard to say. It's most of them have they don't like being called victims, by the way. It's not a term they enjoy. But
of course,
most of them have a multiple of symptoms. A lot have myocarditis or heart effects, blood clots affect other parts of your body. But it is that combination of constant tiredness, constant pain, constant flu almost, only worse.
I think apart from anything else, the frustration, at the very least for all of those people, was the way in which they were being discouraged from raising the possibility and asking questions. You know, they were automatically being discouraged from thinking that it was anything to do with the vaccine. Well, when all the authorities had to do was listen to them and take them seriously.
But this is the core of the whole problem. And I've found it as well. I've in a tiny way, I feel the frustration because we've made this film to broadcast standards, and no one on mainstream media will show it. We've written to newspapers. I know people who work in newspapers who are told, don't bring those stories, we don't want them. So I feel a little bit of the frustration, but it's an enormous frustration for people who are physically ill and physically damaged, who are also then told it's all in your head, it doesn't exist, it's long COVID. I mean, Sir Christopher Chope, who's taken it up in Parliament, he describes it as gaslighting, and it is, and it's actually worse than that. It's
Keith, would you say this is something that you would want to see? Is this testimony and evidence that you think should be out there? Mark saying that it's not being aired by the mainstream.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a democratic politician. I always want to see both sides of the argument. I'm not saying I would necessarily agree with one side or the other, but yeah, I mean, whatever happened to freedom of speech?
Why don't they want to see it? Why don't these TV channels want to air this? What is the problem?
Well, in America at the moment, there are a couple of court cases and freedom of information requests, and what's beginning to be released is clear evidence of collusion between government departments and mainstream media and social media.
Wow.
And it was, first of all, they colluded in creating the fear of this disease.
Yes. I don't think that's denied.
They then created the joy of the vaccine, and then they created the vilification of those they termed anti-vaxxers. And actually, that was a really nasty piece of work. And they were paying broadcasters, and they're putting packages in to various producers. Let's say Neil's in America, if you had a guest on, they would make sure they had what they call trusted messengers.
Wow, how has this happened in our world?
So they would place it. Well, I'll give an example. Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's put his head above the parapet, and he spoke to a parliamentary committee on Thursday, and straight away the machine starts, and he's been smeared on social media.
Wow.
I mean, there was one doctor has called out the Royal College of Physicians and saying this man is dragging your name through the mud by spreading anti-vax lies. Now, why would a senior surgeon, with all his experience, risk his career
with everything to lose? Yes,
but also he's seen a huge increase in cardiac arrests, 14,000 extra from 2021 to 2020, and surely he is enhancing the medical profession by speaking up and saying, I care about patients, there's something wrong here. Now, Neil, I'm not saying we're right or wrong, and I'm not a medical person, but what I am is a fair play journalist, and surely this debate should be had if there is questions around.
In the making of this, was it possible, how easy was it to get medical professionals to speak on the other side of the argument, which is to say to allow for the possibility that there was a major problem?
Dr. Asim Malhotra calls it willful ignorance. I can't remember the second name, but they willfully stepped aside from it because they've been responsible for rolling out this jab and go along with it. It's a bit like it's a company line. Doctors have been following the company line. They're told by the MHRA, they're told by the government that all these things are safe, and they've been going ahead without questioning it. There are different groups of doctors who have spoken out, and they found life very difficult.
Yeah. As regular viewers to this the show will know, at this point I am obliged, in the interests of holding Ofcom at arm's length, to read out the following. In response to this story, scientists at the the JMAMA Neurology Viewpoint have said for the vast majority of people, the Pfizer vaccine causes only mild symptoms. Functional neurological disorders can be triggered by traumatic physical or emotional events, including head injury, a medical or surgical procedure, and vaccinations. It is not exclusive to COVID vaccines and has been reported in response to jabs for other conditions. It has also been found in patients given an injection of harmless liquid saline. Of course, I have to offer that up as an alternative point of view. But what has been the effect of all of this on you personally and professionally?
As you know, we try not to get involved in stories that we're covering. Very hard in this. I'm friends with the people we interviewed. I phoned them and talked to them, and some of them are poorly, and it is very hard. And I said before, it's the frustration. I feel the frustration for them that nobody listens. I mean,
once again, I'm running out of time again,
okay.
Mark, so thank you very much for this. And I only wish I had more time to offer this. And please come back again and we can pick up this story as it develops.
Thank you.
Plenty more to come, including Netflix nonsense regarding The Crown. It's just a fiction. We'll also discuss whether our lights will really go out this winter, and we'll laugh at some comedy wildlife shots because, well, why not? Don't go away.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Coming up, we've got a Great Britain on to tell us all about the Billy chip following the tragic death of its 21-year-old inventor, Billy Abernethy Hope. Plus, we'll be discussing whether blackouts could actually become a thing this winter. And then we'll cheer ourselves up with some amazing comedy wildlife snaps of animals caught acting, well, like animals. You're watching GB News and I'm Neil Oliver. Time, though, for the news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Neil, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story today, Boris Johnson has reportedly reached the 100 backers he needs in the race to become Britain's next Conservative Party leader. Sources close to the former Prime Minister have told GB News Mr Johnson, who's yet to officially declare his interest, has now passed the threshold required to get on to the leadership ballot. That comes after Rishi Sunak also got the backing of 100 Conservative MPs. And yesterday, Penny Mordaunt became the first to officially announce her campaign to replace Liz Truss. Boris Johnson's father, Stanley, told GB News earlier his son has unfinished business and will enter the race.
I think he will put his name forward, and I think he will beat Rishi Sunak in a head-to-head. And I want to say, because I'm now going to reveal this for the first time, when I get my vote, my electronic password, I will be voting for Boris, because I think he will do the things I care about: Europe, environment, peace in our time, and net zero.
But Boris Johnson is yet to face scrutiny from the Commons Privileges Committee on so-called Partygate. In an exclusive interview with GB News, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, said he thinks due process and fairness is incredibly important.
Pulled no brief for Boris Johnson, whom I thought was an absolutely appalling Prime Minister. But I think the question of the procedural propriety of that process is absolutely critical. It should be front and centre stage. And I would say that whether it was Boris Johnson being investigated or anybody else.
Well, the former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has told GB News he thinks Rishi Sunak is the best person for the job.
I think he is, both on economic but also on those critical issues of public trust, the best place to get the government and fundamentally the country moving forward. The trust that the public have in the leader matters, and that's why I think Rishi is best placed to deliver in the national interest.
Now, away from politics, a planned bus strike by hundreds of workers has been stopped following a new pay offer. Around 600 members of the Unite union at Arriva in Kent were set to walk out for 5 days from Monday. If the new pay deal is rejected, the strike action will resume on the 28th of October. And 68 courts across England and Wales will be affected by striking staff today. Legal advisors and court associates who are members of the Public and Commercial Services Union will walk out for 9 days. The workers are locked in a dispute over a management system which their employer says is key to modernising court processes. And Avanti West Coast managers are also striking today in the 4th day of walkouts for the train company this month. The RMT union saying the timetable and operating hours will be significantly reduced, with 1 train an hour running from London to Manchester, Glasgow and Liverpool. Further industrial action planned across all other rail networks at the start of next month. International news, and Iran has condemned a United Nations probe into allegations its country's drones are being used for Russia to attack Ukraine. France, Germany and Britain called for the United Nations to investigate the Kremlin's alleged use of Iranian-made drones. It follows claims from US intelligence that Iranian military trainers were in Crimea, helping Russian forces operate drones to attack targets in Ukraine. And there's been a yellow weather warning in place for most of England and parts of Wales, put in place for this weekend as we brace ourselves for thunder, heavy rain and flooding. The thunderstorm warning is going to last between 4 a.m. tomorrow morning until 5 a.m. Monday. Forecasters are warning batten down the hatches. The wet weather could lead to flooding and possible road closures. We'll keep you up to date on that throughout the weekend here on GB News. But for the moment, you are up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Time now for part 2 of Neil Oliver Live.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Billy Abernethy Hope was just 20 years old when he died on holiday with friends back in 2018. But some of his legacy is a wonderfully simple idea that has helped countless homeless people. The Billy chip, got one right here in my hand, named in his memory, is a token people can buy and then hand to those living on the streets. The chips can be spent in an increasing number of shops and businesses around Bristol and elsewhere. Joining me now to tell us more is Jack Gascoigne, co-founder of Billy Chips. Hi, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you.
Tell me a bit about Billy, first of all.
Well, what can I say? I mean, Billy was one of the best people I've ever met in my life. He was just so alive, so happy, so kind. He had a role as an ambulance driver in Bristol, so really compassionate, really thoughtful, and his first thought every day was about other people instead of himself. And I think that's why really he had the idea and the sort of vision to set up the token that then become Billy Chip.
Now, I think I'm right in saying that he noticed the plight of people on the streets a long time ago. as a youngster. Is that right?
Yeah. There's many stories. Probably his parents and auntie are a better place to tell you, but. Yeah, he used to walk through the sort of streets of Bristol and give out his pocket money to homeless people, go and make sure that their dogs and pets had food to eat. And yeah, just really compassionate. And he just didn't understand how, you know, a country as wealthy as ours could allow people to sleep on the streets.
Now, given that, of course, you can, we've all handed money to homeless people for various reasons and various circumstances. What is the inspiration for, rather than a note or coins, using these? What's the philosophy?
Well, the Billy Chip is really there for the members of the public who feel hesitancy around handing over cash. You know, we'd never tell anyone not to give cash to homeless people. If you do, carry on doing so. But Billy and ourselves recognise that there are a large proportion of society that would like to help directly, would like to donate directly, but are worried about what that donation is going to be spent on. And what they don't want to do is do something that's meant to be a good thing for somebody that might, you know, end up being a detriment.
You literally just answered my question, because I think this is amazing, and you know, no one could criticise this. But as we said backstage, well, I said that I want to give cash because I think it's up to them what they want to spend it on. I felt this is a bit of control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you feel like
you
that,
answered it.
Yeah,
you said,
please carry on giving cash.
Yes.
But there's a lot of people out there who don't think like you, and
which is Keith.
Yeah.
Keith,
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of work with homelessness. I work with organisations. Actually, for 5 years, run a night shelter in Ilford, and giving some rough sleepers cash is a problem because they'll go and spend it either on drugs or they'll spend it on alcohol. This is a brilliant idea. Whenever I give, if they say, "Oh, give me 50p for a cup of tea," I'll actually go and buy them a cup of tea. Or if they say, "I'm hungry," I'll go and buy them the actual food, because that way you're ensuring that they're getting what they need.
Jack, I suppose it's about there's that straightforward transaction, I suppose, of handing over some means of buying or some means of obtaining a hot drink or some food or whatever. But I suppose fundamentally it's also about remembering to reconnect with people on the street who are just stepped over and walked past. There's an inducement there, isn't there, to remember they're there.
Yes.
And to connect with them as fellow travellers.
Yeah, 100%. And just going off on one point there, I think a lot of society recognise now that since COVID we are becoming ever cashless. So it's very hard to, you know, get the amount of money that it will cost for a cup of coffee out as cashback. So Billy Chip there is really to be there to answer sort of two problems. One, the hesitancies of donations, but also the ever-increasing cashlessness of our society.
That's a very good point that you make there, because it is that engagement, and we should. I mean, you don't want a Billy Chip and just say, "Oh, here you go, mate, here's a Billy Chip." We really want that engagement with people on the street, so we get back to them, treating them like human beings. When I was running the shelter, I was leader of the council, and some of the officers and some of my colleagues would be amazed when I was actually talking to rough sleepers, because I knew them, because they came every Thursday night. They'd come to our shelter. I go, "Oh, hello, blah, hello, Lala," and they go, "Oh, but they are human beings."
I think that's really good that you do that, because I just give money and quickly run away, and I feel awkward, and I feel like it's demeaning to them. But then I think, do I just start talking to them?
Exactly, just engage. They're normal human beings.
Jack, what is the future then? You know, Billy Chip started in Bristol. Where is it now? Are there other places taking on this very simple, practical idea?
Yeah, so we launched in London last week with another homeless charity called Change Please. So far we're operating in Elephant Park, Liverpool Street and Stratford. We've also got a couple places sort of dotted around. We've got a couple places in Scotland, a couple places down in Weymouth. But we've been running a trial with Greggs in Bristol for the last 5 or 6 months.
Oh, with Greggs? Oh, that's amazing.
So we're in about sort of 10 of their stores now in
How does the
Bristol.
recipient of a Billy Chip know where he can exchange it for something that he or she needs?
That's a great question. So every Billy Chip outlet has a Billy Chip window sticker on the door to show that not only Billy Chips are able to be redeemed there, but also the homeless person will be welcomed in. They won't be ushered out. They'll be treated the same as everyone else. And also, as well, you'll notice on that Billy Chip there is a QR code. Now, if you scan that, it takes you to a location finder on our website and tells you the nearest place to you it can be redeemed. Avon and Somerset police officers also wear them on their stab vests to not only tell tell homeless people about where their Billy ships can be redeemed, but also tell members of the public who might not know about the scheme but want to help homeless people.
But they may not be
where they
open
are.
24/7.
Yes.
That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that we're sort of working towards now.
Yeah, I just thought straight away, because that's when they're going to go. It's always at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah.
Jack, it's an amazing story. As I mentioned to you in the break before we were able to speak, in doing some of the research, I saw pictures of Billy with his family and what a golden person he looked like in those images, and the family as well. And it's such a worthwhile legacy to have left behind. You know, it's the Billy chips are golden too in their own way. And it's lovely to think of Billy being a Great Britain in his absence. So thanks so much for bringing this in.
No, thank you for having me.
Making us aware of it, and we should all spread the word about just that importance of just engaging with these fellow travellers and paying them some attention. Yeah, very good. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much.
OK, moving on from that uplifting, heartwarming story. Did I ask, the Prince of Wales and John Major ever discuss a plot to oust Her late Majesty the Queen? Already dismissed by Sir John Major as malicious nonsense, the hotly disputed version of events features in an upcoming episode of the Netflix series The Crown. Netflix have responded to the former Prime Minister's scathing remarks by claiming that since the show is a drama based on historical events, it's legitimate to imagine what conversations, quote, could have happened behind closed doors. Let's have a look at what we can expect from the series in question.
In light of the events of the last 12 months, perhaps I have more to reflect on than most.
The royal family is in genuine crisis.
Have royal scandals damaged the country's reputation?
The House of Windsor should be binding the nation together, setting an example of idealized family life. It's a situation that cannot help but affect the stability of the country.
Well, there we go. I'm joined now, I'm pleased to say, by Grant Harold, former royal butler to King Charles when he was Prince of Wales. Thanks for coming in, Grant.
My pleasure.
Good to see you. So, where are we? Is this just harmless TV fun, or is it, as John Major says, malicious nonsense?
It's such a tricky subject, isn't it? I mean, this is the 5th season, so it's been going for a few years now, and I've got to confess the last season, it obviously got shared on social media, and I noticed on social media there was a lot of a generation that didn't know what all took place, and there was a lot of anger, and I think that's why this has become a bit of a problem, because obviously people are watching it, they're believing everything they're seeing, and they're kind of comment on it, and I think that's why they're asking for these suggestions being put forward for disclaimers and things. But where do you draw the line? This is where it becomes tricky.
I think it is.
Narinda's a big fan.
I'm a huge fan, and I'm getting so annoyed when people are saying, "Oh well, they shouldn't be airing it. It's damaging to King Charles." He wasn't a good boy. He was a terrible husband.
Do you know what?
He had an affair behind our Diana. He was horrible to her. Camilla was awful. She was a homewrecker.
I think you should say what you think.
Do you know what's tricky? It's like, obviously what happened. There's no two ways about it. And I think what's difficult is obviously they're kind of reporting on the history. You know, they're kind of telling the story as it was. And I think obviously there's bits they don't know. And what I've been saying to people recently is, when you look at a lot of historical documentaries or dramas, there's bits that we don't know. And, you know, they have to kind of fill those gaps in.
When it comes to the matter in hand, this imagined, let's say, conversation between Charles and PM John Major, can you imagine such a conversation having taken place?
Not really, no. This is what I find, because I've obviously watched The Crown as well, and it is, you do kind of get drawn into it, don't you? You do watch it. I'm not going to say you don't.
The acting is superb.
It's very good acting. But the thing that was interesting was when it all began, I was actually contacted by the team and to be an advisor. I was even sent the first script, and I read it, and I remember thinking to myself, the problem for me is if I got involved with it, I obviously don't want to be given every detail.
You'd give it legitimacy, wouldn't
exactly.
you?
And so that's the other argument is what happens? Say it was accurate. Say it was every detail was spot on. that would be a problem because I'd be thinking, well, how are people getting this information? So this is where it becomes...
But a lot of this series is accurate because there's the Jonathan Dimbleby interview and Diana's interviews. That's all facts. They did these interviews. They contributed to the books.
It's a soap opera, you know, and it's drama. And even if you watch films about events, they dramatise it. They give different people the lines that they never actually spoke. If you watch the Elton John movie, you know, that's supposed to be mildly accurate, but all that things didn't happen like that.
But you've seen behind the scenes, so you're watching it. Is it accurate?
I have to say, I mean, I remember all of this. Been right through the real life drama, insofar as I was following it in newspapers and all the rest of it. And I absolutely remember there being discussions in all manner of places about would the Queen step aside? You know, would the Queen abdicate? Was that even possible? What would be the constitutional repercussions of such a move? It's not as though that conversation wasn't out there in the...
But there was also a conversation, if you remember, I think it was in the 60s from memory, about the Queen being part of overthrowing the socialist government because we didn't agree with that. I mean... Yeah.
I do wonder if we move on, say, from specifically this incident and this series, are there lines, would you say, that drama shouldn't cross? Are there blurrings that shouldn't happen in relation to people who are, after all, still alive?
I think this is where it's tricky, and you're quite right. I mean, when the Queen was alive, and there's so many documentaries and movies about the Queen, like The Queen, the movie, and I've watched that, and there's bits of that even I think that just doesn't make sense, and I'm sure they watch it and think the same. I'm sure that there's bits that they watch or the late Queen have watched and thought, but she never said anything.
Well, I think Prince Harry did. He said, I think he did watch it and he did come forward and say, well, some of it is made up. That's not all true. So, you know, it's just, you've got to know that. That's just a fact. We know that.
I think with any, with any kind of programme, I'm guessing, especially when it's a historical drama or even recent history, they don't know everything. Obviously, they don't. Otherwise, as I said, there would be a problem. So I think they've got to try to fill those gaps in, and that's where the problem comes, because obviously, I'm not going to say because I wasn't there, but, you know, they're putting the two and two and they're trying to come up with the answer, and that might not always be right, and that's where it gets really...
But you were there, so tell us something. Spill some tea.
Not at that point.
Aren't they allowed artistic licence? Aren't they allowed to make it more interesting and more edgy than real life? Because real life is the Queen just constantly dealing with red boxes, isn't it?
I wasn't sure about this before we started this conversation, but I think I'm coming down on your side of the line. You know, as you illustrate it with, you know, biopics about other characters, there's no way that you could have a 2-hour film without some, you know, imagination and supposing and what ifs. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to create...
entertaining, is it?
Oh, I think this is watered down. I think there's a lot more behind the scenes that they don't even know about.
They're drawing you in. They're drawing you in.
This is the whole point, though. This is what's so clever with this programme, is we're discussing it. It has become big news. Look at all the celebrities that are getting involved in it. And this is genius, because for Netflix, it's brilliant. We're all talking about it. We're all going to watch it.
Kids are getting educated. My kids who've got no interest in the monarchy, they're watching it so interested.
Which is part of, and I might be wrong on this, it's just, this is what happened last year, was obviously there was a lot with what Diana went through, which a lot of us remember, obviously, you know, and it was upsetting, there's no two ways about it, and the funeral and everything, it was, I remember that
terrible.
As if it was yesterday.
Oh my God.
And this generation didn't know any of that.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary how suddenly, and it surprised me, because I hate to admit it, as you get older, you don't realise, do you? You don't suddenly realise, wait a minute, I'm a different generation to this.
I have to ask you while I've got you here. With that, I'm not going to ask you what it is, but are you sitting quietly on information thinking, well, if they think that's interesting, if only they...
Yes!
Unfortunately not. I think this is the thing, you know, when you're lucky enough, like myself, to be in a position where you get to work for the family, of course you see them behind the scenes, you get to know them. And
what's King Charles like?
He's fantastic. You know, this is what's really frustrating, because you see a side that sometimes gets portrayed, and it's about, I think, just from my point of view, because when I was there, they were so kind to me. In fact, I said recently, you know, I remember doing an interview and somebody said, oh, but you must have been told off because, you know, as a butler, you must have... And I said, no, in the years I was there, not once Did he ever say anything like that to me? He was always a gentleman.
But what about Camilla?
He's got a nice sense of humour.
Oh, don't say that!
I actually saw it a few weeks ago. In Scotland. I saw her a few weeks ago at Dunfermline.
She is wonderful.
She came up and we shook hands. It was actually funny. She didn't actually realise I was actually there, and we shook hands, and she was like, "Oh, Grant," it was the surprise.
I'm going to leave it at that. Grant Harold, Royal Butler, and
my
master
pleasure.
of discretion. Thank you so much for being so discreet in your account of those events that some of us remember oh so well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, are those proposed blackouts we've been warned about actually going to happen this winter? We'll get the latest. See you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Homes made cold and dark this winter by unavoidable blackouts and shortages of gas for heating and cooking. That's the latest forecast by no lesser figure than the head of the National Grid. According to that boss, John Pettigrew, uncertainty about supplies of gas upon which Britain depends for light and heat might mean blackouts between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m, very worst time, on weekdays during the coldest periods of January and February. Energy analyst Andy Mayer joins me now to contemplate, well, what else can you call it? The big freeze. Good evening, Andy.
Good evening.
Can it really be true that we, the inhabitants of one of the most developed modern countries in the world, cannot guarantee to provide heat and light for ourselves in the winter ahead?
Well, just to provide some reassurance first, the situation as it stands at the moment is the risk of blackouts and freeze-outs, obviously the latter being about heat, not power, has gone up, but it's not yet the case that we think it's a surety that this will happen. A lot of things have to go wrong for it to be a serious risk this winter, but if the government doesn't sort out domestic supplies of energy by this time next year, next winter is looking far more risky. So, to put it in context, sorry, no.
I was just going to say, why is this the situation in which we find ourselves?
Well, a lot of things have been bad in British energy policy for about 2 decades. So, both governments of all political stripes have been exercised with the fantasy that it's easy to transition from a fossil fuel economy, which is where we are today, to one that's based on renewables, nuclear power, and other forms of low carbon generation and heat. And it's extremely difficult. It is the future, but we're not there yet. And in trying to get there too quickly, what they've done is sent a signal out that they don't want fossil fuels. So people haven't been investing properly in the North Sea. They haven't been investing in onshore fracking, which was banned for a time. And we're still having that debate now while we're facing the potential for blackouts and freeze-outs next winter. So that's the underlying cause. Other things that have happened is the same thing has been happening across Europe. And for gas in particular, we are a regional market. So when the Ukraine-Russia war conflict started, an enormous chunk of the gas that we needed was taken out of play. And that's what everybody's panicking about at the moment. Meanwhile, across the rest of the world, our friends in America are trying to help, but they also want to keep the gas at home so they can keep their prices down. And our not-so-friendly neighbours in OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, some of the states that are more aligned with Russia, are not wanting to put these things out there yet because they want to keep prices high. So it's a very difficult situation. And the insecurity, fundamentally, though, has been caused by a lack of preparation at home.
I mean, it does rest, doesn't it, on the fact that we used to store and be able to store a lot more gas, and that facility was done away with. And it's down to that.
There's a lot of attention on the Rough facility, which is one 5-day storage facility that's based around old fields in the North Sea. And actually, that was never our storage strategy. The old storage strategy was more simple. We had the North Sea. We didn't need to store gas. We could just get more stuff out of the North Sea quickly. But that's collided with the government trying to throttle the North Sea for about a decade by putting windfall taxes on it, by encouraging them to go through a Pacific low-carbon transition, which is far too soon. And this is why we're in the trouble we're in now. And even now, with this going on, Parliament this week debated whether or not to ban shale gas for good in the middle of an energy crisis. So there's a complete lack of reality coming from our elected politicians on what the state of the crisis actually is.
Complete lack of reality, I think, sums a lot of it up. I suppose a lot of people watching will want to know, supposing it happens, I mean, I appreciate you saying that other dominoes have to fall before it happens, but if it does, how would it work? You know, would it be rolling blackouts? Would people get warning? Would it be in different places on different days?
Yeah, so there should be some reassurance here that the national grid is extremely well prepared for this eventuality. It's always been a risk. It's just one we've not seen for decades, not since the 1970s, really. Although if you were up in the islands and highlands of Scotland, you may have seen it a bit more recently. What they do is they try and black out places in rotation. So there are scheduled regions and there are scheduled times of the day, as you mentioned, 4 to 7 o'clock as one 3-hour slot. And they will try to make it as fair as possible. So it's not the case, for example, that London can dominate by having all the power. It is the case that they'll try and distribute the blackouts around the country. Freeze-outs are more serious in winter. Freeze-outs mean that people who need the heat, particularly the elderly and the vulnerable, are at risk. So that is something the government will try and avoid at all costs. But if Russia decides that they're going to start doing what they are alleged to have done with connectors and pipelines by blowing them up, then we won't be able to get the gas from Norway, which is a huge problem. We won't be able to compensate for that with LNG from around the world fast enough to avoid there being a shortage. So it's a big risk. Europe is less exposed to that risk because they do have physical storage capacity. We don't, not very much anyway. And that is something the government needs to address urgently. They need to get some kind of backup on stream as fast as possible, or this becomes an ever-present risk if the Russians escalate the conflict.
Andy, I'll open this up to my guests in the studio with me, and I know that Narinder Kaur has a question coming.
So Andy, what do you propose they should do right now? What can be done right now? Because it doesn't seem, listening to you, there's any solution right now. And you're saying Russia, should we not have gone to war with Russia? Should we not have backed Ukraine, sorry? What can we do?
Yeah. I mean, there are bigger questions there than just the risk of blackouts and freeze-outs to us. I mean, clearly the moral case to back our friends and allies in Ukraine is absolute. We're dealing with an authoritarian dictatorship in Russia based on a particularly nasty form of ethno-nationalist, almost fascist politics that has to be opposed. It would have been a fundamental mistake not to back the Ukrainians.
Keith, it is about more than Russia-Ukraine, isn't it? I mean, that's a recent addition to the problem, but it is years, isn't it, of mismanagement, of ridiculous hubris in relation to Agenda 2030 and net zero.
Well, I think I accepted that earlier on your programme. Mm-hmm. It goes back decades, not just this government, but I also think that this, whilst maybe some people are panicking a bit over this, I think there would be great criticism if the powers that be weren't to say, well, there is a risk of blackouts, but I actually don't think these blackouts will actually occur. But if we don't say there's a risk of it and then it happens, everyone would be up in arms. And if we say, well, there is a risk, maybe some people will actually use less energy than they are at the moment. That'll help to take the risk away. But also, I think people will be more comfortable. So I think this is being a bit blown out of proportion, to be perfectly honest.
Andy, I mean, it does beg the question. The head of the National Grid is talking about January, February as though those were the months to worry about. But how do we get beyond this? Without plans in place to find another way of handling this situation? How can it end at the end of February? Surely it's a rolling problem from now on.
So the two things that can be done immediately are both happening. One is to establish new trade deals for gas supply with countries around the world, and we may need to hold our nose on the ethics of some of those countries. The demand side part of the equation is correct as well, but it's very difficult to force people to reduce demand if at the same time you're subsidising energy use, which is what the government has decided to do for at least a year. So they've got a very curious policy where they're simultaneously incentivising us to use more energy, while at the same time telling us not to. And the outgoing administration has been all over the shop on this, and they haven't really got a solution. The other thing that needs to happen that could make a difference in 1 to 3 years' time is we need to start fracking. We need to rapidly expand exploration of the North Sea. So we've got domestic resources that can then be either used here or exported in the summer, making a lot of tax revenue on those exports, so we can then plough that back into the longer term solutions, which are nuclear power, wind power, solar power, all of these other forms of energy that will eventually remove our dependency on gas.
Andy, since we're talking about electric light, I don't think I can let you go without asking what that Robbie the robot over your shoulder is that's blinking and flashing. What is that in the corner of your room?
So you could use it as a blackout demonstrator. I mean, it's the thing we do for local kids in the area. We create models that they put in the window. So there's a display at the moment in the window for Halloween that we light up, and it's got moving parts and fun stuff. And that's just a hobby. But yeah,
that's very good. You'd almost swear we prepared that, wouldn't you? That almost looked like it was rehearsed. Narinder, it is astonishing, isn't it, no matter what, that this country, this developed country, that we're even having this conversation.
I know, because I was just saying to you that in India, when I've gone on travels there, they have energy blackouts. They have everything goes, but they have generators to back it up if, you're wealthy enough. But otherwise, you sit in the dark for 2 or 3 hours. I can't believe that would happen here. I mean, I can't accept that, Andy. I will not sit in my house with candles, freezing, and unable to, cook food. How can that even happen in this country?
I think we'll leave that question hanging there. Andy Mayer, energy expert, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's definitely been the hottest topic of conversation here before and after the show, so thank you for your time this evening. Moving on now. Something completely different. The sinking of RMS Titanic on the 15th of April 1912 has inspired countless books, films, documentaries, you name it. More than a century after the ship went down, it seems we will never forget the loss of the jewel in the crown of the White Star Line and the loss of 1,500 souls. Adding her name to the list of those who have found themselves consumed by the tragedy is author and journalist Julie Cook, who has written a brand new novel, Titanic Girls, about those unforgettable events. Julie joins me now. Lovely to have you here, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
Why this story? Why this ship?
Why this story? I know it has been done a lot, but I have a personal reason. My great-grandfather was a stoker who died on the Titanic. And as you know, the stokers were the men who worked in the bowels of the ship, lifting the coal into the furnaces, and their muscle power fueled the ship, basically. And he died. He was only 40, and he died leaving behind a wife and 5 children. And so I grew up hearing this family story.
Wow, yes.
And I learned how much the wives suffered, the wives and the children left behind. And I sort of outwardly, I'd hear the stories of Titanic as a very rich, opulent tragedy. We know about all the rich and the famous on board, what a beautiful ship it was. But back at home, my father would be saying, oh, and your great-grandmother had to take in laundry and the poverty was unbelievable. And so there were these two sort of narratives of Titanic, and I always felt that that one was missing from the wider picture, the bigger story.
Where did your great-grandmother live?
She lived in Southampton, so very near the docks where it all happened.
And was that a community that was badly hit by the loss?
Yes, very much so. It was devastated. It said there wasn't a street in Southampton that didn't lose somebody. There's a map in sort of museums you can look at, and every single street lights up with somebody who has died. And so learning that, I did write another book previously called The Titanic and the City of Widows, which was non-fiction, and that was looking at the effect it had. And then I had all this research and thought, well, there's too much there to just put in that book. I'd like to write a fiction about it, just to really bring the emotional side of it home rather than just sort of facts and figures.
We were talking earlier about The Crown, and obviously The Crown is about real people, some of whom are still with us today. Is it real people that you have incorporated into this fiction?
It's real people's stories that I've then attributed to sort of fictional characters. So when I did my research, I looked through some primary sources which were called the Titanic Relief Fund, which was the charity that gave the money out to the different women. And it had, you know, so-and-so gets a sewing machine, so-and-so gets some false teeth. But it would also be, this lady has been drinking, she's struck off the fund now, and her children will be taken away from her. And it was a very sort of patriarchal, as it was, obviously a patriarchal society, but the way the Titanic Relief Fund worked was you had to behave yourself, because if you didn't, you were struck off.
It's a social credit system.
Yes. Exactly.
Julie, I see a film coming out of this. I am obsessed with the first film, and I think, and I read somewhere that one of the ladies, she fell in love with a guy who survived it, and he was seen as a coward for surviving.
Yeah, I actually interviewed descendants like me of people. So obviously my great-granddad died, but I met descendants who were survivors, and they came back and they were called cowards in the street. So one chap in particular, he had to live in his shed virtually the rest of his life, making toys for children. He was ashamed to go out because people would call him a coward for years.
Keith, you had a point you wanted to make.
As I understand it, you've merged some of the stories, haven't you? So to give one particular character more interest, you've merged 2 or 3 characters together to make that happen.
Yeah, so there's 3 girls in the fiction story, Lucy, Catherine and Susan. And Lucy is very loosely based on my great-grandmother's story. So she loses her stoker husband on the ship. And then sort of I've incorporated a lot of other stuff that was going on at the time, like the suffrage movement. You know, I don't think you can really talk about the Titanic without talking about women's suffrage.
Yeah, of course.
So many women were trying to get the boat then, and yet they were, you know, tossed like bags into the lifeboats by men to save their lives. And so this huge debate at the time happened, which was, well, how can you ask for suffrage when men have just saved your life and died for you on the Titanic? So it was a really seismic time.
So maybe this will make Netflix then, and then people can say, oh, this is the reality, and we'll have a debate about that.
Yeah.
I've been, like everyone else, you know, I've been sometimes obsessed by the story of Titanic, and it has struck me that when it happened, you know, 2 years before the First World War, and there was something like a microcosm of society that was affected on the Titanic in the same way that society would be affected during the 4 years of the war. You know, for example, the middling classes, you know, not the poorest and not the richest, you know, took a huge hit on Titanic in the same way that it was that middling class of men who were called into the trenches, who were, you know, harvested in greater numbers. It was almost a foreboding or a foreshadowing of the 20th century to come, really. And I wonder if that almost mystical element about what happened on Titanic is part of why it so holds our attention even a century and more later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, exactly. And I think the ship itself, you can look at it as a sort of a microcosm of society. You know, you had the stratas, you had the first class at the top, and as you say, the middle, and then the stokers like my great-grandfather right at the bottom. But it was the same with the way the Titanic Relief Fund money was given out. It was done in class A to G. So if you were the wife of an officer, you got a decent amount, but the wife of a stoker didn't get much at all.
So bad, but gosh.
What did your great-grandmother do to to move on and to... I mean, she still had a family to
Yeah, she had
to
5 children. I mean,
provide for.
in the initial days, she took in laundry from the street to survive, so she'd wash people's clothes. Many women did that. There were cases of women did what they could to survive until the Titanic Relief Fund kicked in, which wasn't for a few months later. But there was a lot of poverty, there was malnourishment. The Salvation Army had to give out nourishing boxes of food to the women because they were starving. Children had no shoes, diphtheria was still rife. It was just an awful time.
And of course they're grieving as well.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
God, they're grieving on top of that.
Yeah.
You're so right to have taken the path that you have, because, of course, we think in terms of it all having happened aboard that ship out in the North Atlantic in the dark. But, of course, it tore holes in the fabric of lives back on land in huge numbers.
Exactly, and I think that's why I wanted to write this, was because all the sort of representations I saw, such as the great James Cameron film, it kind of all ends when Titanic sinks and you live or die. And I think that's not... I wanted to just reiterate that that's not when the story ended for so many people. It actually reverberated.
It actually began. The story
Yes,
remains
exactly.
unwritten, actually.
Yeah.
And you've just wrote it.
Yeah.
What else did you find, let's say, for perhaps that didn't make it into the book? You know, I mean, you must have a great reservoir of stories, human stories.
Lots. Really, I mean, some of the most... It was very upsetting, actually, doing the research. I mean, there were women who were pregnant when their husbands went away as stokers or stewards, and they were literally earning a pittance just to come back and try and rent a house together, and they died. One woman died in childbirth a few months later, so the whole family was sort of wiped out. Children who were taken into care. In those days, care was, you know, a workhouse. So it really, really affected for the next generation at least to come. I mean, I was lucky. My family were lucky. My grandmother sort of survived, and all her children stayed together, but lots of them didn't. And you know, it didn't end when the ship sank. It really did carry on for people.
And this was a story that you grew up knowing, was it? It wasn't that you stumbled across it because is that so? She is why you're interested in Titanic and not the other way.
Yeah, my father, you know, was adamant that we had to know the story. You know, whenever anything came on, like the old Water Lord film, you know, and I remember he'd sit there and say, "Well, your great grandfather died on that ship," and then he'd, you know, talk about it. And so I grew up thinking, well, there's, as I say, I thought it was a rich person's tragedy, but no, it's not at all. There's a huge working class strata that isn't talked about. That I felt should have their voice.
How did you become a stoker? Because I watched the film and they are the manpower behind it.
Yes, that's so true. They were the lowest of the low, but they were also the scariest of the scary. They were hard.
Yeah.
I mean, they were called the Black Gang because they were covered in soot and coal.
Right.
But because they were scary gang, you know, you didn't want to come across them on a dark night, for example.
Really?
Because they had to be hard, you know, they had to... There were stories, I did some research where apparently on one ship, not the Titanic, but another ship, a group of stokers had an argument with another stoker and he never got off the other end of the ship. Apparently he was fed into the furnaces.
Oh,
so
wow.
They were hard.
Narinder, what do you think it is? Because part of what fascinates me about Titanic is how many people are fascinated by Titanic.
I'm so fascinated by it. I just think the movie was amazing. Obviously, the love story aspect, which is, I know that's probably, but I think this gritty reality is something I've never heard about, and I'm so interested to read this book.
Keith, why do you think, after all this time, why do you think it holds attention? And I mean, I can feel it here, the
tragedy.
To hear yet more stories about Titanic when you think we've heard it all.
Well, no, I don't think we have. I mean, I was watching a documentary which gave a completely different angle on why the Titanic sank. Yes, it did hit the iceberg, but there's this story about they knew that there was a fire in one of the storage areas for the coal, and it was the heat from that warped some of the defensive walls and allowed the water to go through. So there's more to the story. I mean, and they're even like trying to look down in the water now for it, aren't they? But it's fascinating because this was the great unsinkable ship of our great empire. And it sunk.
I think it was the tragedy, what it was all supposed to be, and it ended in just sadness.
Julie, have you exorcised your Titanic ghosts now, or will you go on to do more?
Well, I'm glad I've done this because I feel finally that the working class stories are out there and the wives and the children. But yeah, I mean, I think there's still more to talk about. I mean, not least the fact that what happened afterwards. I mean, so many children in some ways lost opportunities because their father died, so perhaps they might have had an apprenticeship that didn't happen or whatever. On the other hand, some people said that those who got money from the Titanic Relief Fund did better because they were given slightly more. So it was a bit of, you know, oh, so-and-so's got that money. You know, it was very like it would be today, I suppose, you know. But, yeah.
Wonderful stuff. I think you can rest assured that if you had any doubts that people had run out of steam on hearing about Titanic, that's surely been
is the book out
wiped away now?
It's you can order it now on Amazon, but it's out from Monday in paperback and Kindle.
Wow.
Yeah. Brilliant. Julie Cook, author. All the best of success with that, and thanks for coming in and telling us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We've all been energised by that conversation, I think. Coming up, it's what we've all been waiting for, the Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards. A bit of light relief, just what we all need. See you in 2 minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. As promised, there's some feedback from content earlier, some about the monologue at the top of the show. Sabrina says, I was so missed. That's lovely, Sabrina. Thank you so much for that. Great to have you back. Neil, Emily was a great stand-in for you. Hope you enjoyed your holiday. I certainly did. I was on the beach in the sunshine with my family. Rishi Washi in his tiny suit, his tiny tight suit. I love it, Neil. They're all just looking after themselves and not the people. It's awful. That's from Adrian in Northumberland. Your call to arms against the shadowy actors trying to take our freedoms is what we all need to hear. We need to stand together now more than ever and stand up for our freedoms. That's from Ash. I couldn't agree more. And finally from Steve. Thank you so much for your words and thoughts. We've had substandard politicians foist upon us that are easily controlled and, as you say, handed a script. Thanks again for keeping people's spirits up. I do try. Thank you for all of that. And finally, as we say, in these often gloomy days, we all need a smile and a laugh, as many of both as possible, in fact. With that aim in mind, we bring you now a privileged glimpse of the finalists in this year's Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards. I'll be honest, I had not heard of the Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards, but I'm so glad that I know about it now. Founded back in 2015, with a view to encouraging us all to pay more attention to and therefore to take better care of nature in all its splendour. The entries nowadays, all these years later, bring joy, it's the only word for it, to millions of people around the world. And a former finalist in the competition, Daniel Trim, joins me now to consider the lighter side of wildlife. Hello there, Daniel. Thanks for joining me.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on.
This is lovely stuff. If I can ask you first of all, how hard is it to capture the kind of moments we're going to showcase here? What sacrifices do people make to provide us with these smiles?
Early alarm clocks, definitely starting with that. A lot of time out there, and actually a lot of these photographers will be there trying to take serious photographs, and us wildlife photographers tend to take things too seriously a lot of the time. So that's where this competition is so great. These will be, in a lot of cases, unintentional moments they didn't expect that they captured, and probably lightened their mood at the time as well. They were probably hunkered down, having stayed still for hours, maybe in the rain and things. And yeah, it does often take a lot of, people say patience, but it can be stubbornness as well.
Do wildlife photographers tend to focus on, well, pardon the pun, on a particular species, or do you go out there and just go for anything with a heartbeat, feathered, furred, whatever?
Actually, both, to be honest. I think normally an award-winning photo will be from someone who's very familiar with their subject and who has spent a lot of time with it.
Oh, we're looking at
and that's
Daniel. I have to comment. We're looking at some lovely stuff here.
Because, of course, these are lots of chance encounters rather than long-term projects, probably in a lot of cases. So another kind of difference, I guess, between conventional wildlife photography competitions and this one.
Are you able to see this image, Daniel? Are you seeing these images as we're playing them here?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, brilliant. Lots of human emotion seen in the wildlife. I think that. I mean, look at that one.
Is that a cassowary?
Yeah, I think it was a cassowary. Yeah, looked like it was stealing someone's lunch. Another great photo. Again, you kind of connect with their emotion here, don't you? And then a sniggering moose, always going to get some votes, I'm sure.
A winking owl. I say that very carefully.
Yeah.
Can anybody embark on this as a pursuit? I mean, for example, what kit, at the very least, does a would-be wildlife photographer need to have a fighting chance?
Obviously a camera, but I mean, phones today are brilliant, and I would be surprised if there isn't one photo in there that someone took on their phone. I mean, phones will never be as good as the best cameras on the market, but not everyone has the best camera on the market, whereas I'd say pretty much everyone has a phone now. So it's not about having the best kit in all sides of wildlife photography. It's actually about being there and putting yourself kind of somewhere with the chance to capture those moments. That's really the critical thing. It's not about equipment, it's about being there.
Now, I think your entry, your success was in 2017, is that right? And I think we have the picture in question. What's happening here?
Yeah, so these are two mud skippers, which are actually a fish. And they're actually about to have a fight. I was laying in the mud, very muddy myself, when I took this in Thailand, and it's an aggressive moment, but actually it just looks like two mud skippers singing, and it kind of happened in the blink of an eye. And when I look back at the LCD screen of my camera, I kind of saw that photo, and it made me smile. And I think hopefully that's what resonated with the judges at the time. It just kind of looks like two fish singing when actually they were about to have a pop at each other.
It sounds to me, you talk about lying in the mud, it sounds very much to me like an obsession, Daniel.
Yeah, it is. And I think my wife will be watching downstairs and nodding right now at that point, because it is absolutely an obsession. You have to be dedicated and stubborn and just be out as much as you possibly can. You know, when the weather's coming in, you think, no, I'll just stay a little bit longer. Something might happen. I might get a waving raccoon like this one to take a photo of. And I think really it becomes an obsession just because you never know what moment's going to come next, like a hippo eating a heron, as you can see on the screen now, which I'm sure didn't
Daniel
happen,
Trim, wildlife photographer, that's lovely stuff. You've lifted us. That's all from me tonight on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks as always to my panel. Next up, it's the best of headliners.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking rather mixed as heavy and thundery bands of rain push north right across the country. Let's home in on the detail. So a rather cloudy start to Sunday morning across northern Scotland, with some low cloud and also patchy rain in places. Temperatures starting the day on a mild note as a result. It's a cloudy morning too for Northern Ireland, with some patchy rain or drizzle in places. Any brighter breaks will be reserved for the east coast. A dry start across northern England for those up early too. However, outbreaks of heavy and thundery rain will quickly move in from the south. And turning increasingly wet across North Wales and the Liverpool Bay area as thundery rain moves northwards. Difficult travelling conditions as well expected as the winds start to pick up. Temperatures around 14 degrees Celsius. And thunderstorms to greet the Midlands early on Sunday morning. Heavy downpours leading to some localised flooding across the area first thing in the morning. Temperatures will start on the mild side though, once more at around 14 Celsius. A cloudy start to Sunday morning across much of East Anglia. However, those thunderstorms and heavy downpours will soon move in from the south. Temperatures beginning the day at around 15 Celsius. A very settled morning across southern England too. Heavy showers and thunderstorms once again.
On Mark Dolan tonight, is it selfish not having children? We'll hear from Andrea Williams from Christian Concern, who says growing a loving family has never been more important. And we'll speak to a lady called Veronica from the Child Free Connection, who's chosen not to have kids. In My Big Opinion, I'll be dealing with Tory MP Tobias Ellwood, who's talking down the importance of free markets. Just when did the Tories give up believing in capitalism? And in my take at 10, it's time to get rid of pronouns in the workplace. This is compelled speech, it's tyranny, and he, him, and she, her can do one. We're live at 9.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening. You're with GB News. Our latest news headlines. Sources close to the Prime Minister have told GB News earlier on today that Mr Johnson, who's yet to declare, has now passed the threshold required to get onto the leadership ballot. But Rishi Sunak supporters have thrown doubt on those claims by Boris Johnson supporters that he's reached the 100 backers needed to become the next Tory leader. However, Sunak supporters point out there are only 74 who've publicly declared their support for Johnson. Well, it comes as Rishi Sunak, who now has 129 publicly declared supporters, took the lead in the campaign race. Yesterday, Leader of the House of Commons Penny Mordaunt became the first to announce her campaign to replace Liz Truss. Boris Johnson's father Stanley told GB News his son has unfinished business and will declare.
I think he will put his name forward, and I think he will beat Rishi Sunak in a head-to-head. And I want to say, because I'm now going to reveal this for the first time, when I get my vote, my electronic password, I will be voting for Boris, because I think he will do the things I care about: Europe, environment, peace in our time, and net zero.
Yet Boris Johnson is yet to face scrutiny from the Commons Privileges Committee on so-called Partygate. In an exclusive interview with GB News, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, said he thinks due process and fairness is incredibly important.
Pulled no brief for Boris Johnson, whom I thought was an absolutely appalling Prime Minister. But I think the question of the procedural propriety of that process is absolutely critical. It should be front and centre stage. And I would say that whether it was Boris Johnson being investigated or anybody else.
Well, the former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has told GB News he thinks Mr Sunak is the best person for the job.
I think he is, both on economic but also on those critical issues of public trust, the best place to get the government and fundamentally the country moving forward. The trust that the public have in the leader matters, and that's why I think Rishi is best placed to deliver in the